Hello, everyone. Thanks so much for tuning in today. I'm Dr. Chana Davis from Those Nerdy Girls, and I'm here with Dr. Krishana Sankar from ScienceUpFirst. Did I pronounce your name right?
Yes, you did. It's Krishana.
Okay. Thank you. My name is Chana. I know that's also a hard one. People don't often get that right. So we've got Chana and Krishana um, here with you today to talk about fighting misinformation. And we want to discuss how each of us can do our part to fight misinformation and protect others. So, this includes having difficult conversations with people who don't agree with you. I feel like I want to acknowledge the elephant in the room today. Like the timing of this conversation could not be more apt. We had planned this around the Together Against Misinformation campaign next week for Science Up First, but given the US elections, it feels like a conversation about polarizing discussions and misinformation is just more important than ever. So thank you for being here to be part of this conversation.
Happy to be here
Um,
with you.
And thank you to everyone in the audience, because really fighting misinformation is a team sport and we want as many people on this team as possible. So we're basically going to be trying to tool you up to be part of the anti-misinformation effort. So before we jump in, we're both going to quickly introduce ourselves and our organizations, and then we'll be doing this whole misinformation education toolkit conversation. So do you want to get started?
Yeah, sure. So, hi everyone. My name is Krishana, like Chana said. So, I'm a trained scientist with a PhD from the University of Toronto from its Faculty of Medicine. And I'm also a trained science communicator. And I'm currently working with the Canadian Association of Science Centers as the science advisor and community partnerships lead of the ScienceUpFirst initiative. So ScienceUpFirst was actually founded in 2021 during the pandemic, particularly because we saw a rapid rise of misinformation, especially online on social media platforms, which was, of course, leading to harms for Canadians. And so we, as an organization and initiative, we work with independent scientists, researchers, and science communicators covering information within many disciplines, including health science and climate science. And we continue to address misinformation and promote science literacy, critical thinking, and of course, informed decision making, which is, of course, one of the main reasons why I'm here today. So, as was mentioned, Science Up First is hosting a national campaign called Together Against Misinformation. And our aim is to start a dialogue around misinformation. More specifically, what is it, how to spot it, and how we can reduce its spread. Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Mm-hmm. It feels like a very natural alliance, and it feels like an overdue conversation. So I'm Dr. Chana Davis. I'm a geneticist trained at UBC and Stanford University, and I also have a science communication page called Fueled by Science, and I'm a contributor to Those Nerdy Girls. Just a bit about Those Nerdy Girls, in case you're new to us. We are a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization focused on separating fact from fiction and navigating today's complex information environment. Sounds pretty familiar. We have a dual mission to help our readers make better health decisions by providing practical and factual health information, and we build readers' confidence in navigating health information and sharing their knowledge with others. Our vision is a world in which everyone has the tools and the confidence to make informed, evidence-based health decisions. Those Nerdy Girls was founded in 2020, originally as Dear Pandemic, to help answer questions in navigating the COVID-19 pandemic. We started with a small team of highly passionate and skilled women with scientific and clinical expertise, and this organization has grown and evolved a lot over the last 4 years, and we now have a broader scope that includes other health and science topics. The common theme is that we focus on information problems where there's either too much information, not enough information, or an abundance of misinformation, or sometimes all three. And it's still very much a volunteer-driven organization. So, yeah, we are here for truth and science, and we're not going anywhere. We're glad that you're joining us. Oh my goodness, I forgot to turn my phone off. Bad practice. Okay, do not do that next time you're hosting a conversation. So we are going to be having a conversation today about difficult discussions with others who have a different viewpoint and potentially a misinformed viewpoint. So this is something that Science Up First and Those Nerdy Girls have covered a lot in the context of COVID, but it really applies much more broadly. Political situations, for example. So this is just an important skill set that is, it's not necessarily intuitive. It's not something I had really learned about before I started science writing. And it's tempting to think that you win people over by shoving facts down their throat, but that is absolutely not the best way to do it. And so, in planning this, we try to think about, there's so much we want to convey to you because this is a whole field of study. And we're just kind of going to break the conversation today, like what we want to share with you today, into three big chunks. The first is kind of the general shape and strategies to think about when you're having conversation. And the second is knowledge and skills about navigating information that you can bring to yourself and to others. And the third is just some more practical tips from our personal and professional experience. So, Krishana, I'll turn it over to you to talk about the general strategies and approaches as you go into a conversation.
Yeah, and like you said, I think this is it's a really timely topic. I mean, both our organizations work on it, but it's a great time for us to revisit a lot of the work that we do. We have seen it's tense times. Emotions are running really high, and so although many of us have different opinions and views on many things, there are often relationships that we want to ensure that we are maintaining. And so it's important to have different strategies to help us through those really tough conversations, especially during these times. So, there are a list of strategies that we can use, but one of the first things I always like to bring up is listening. I think, listening is an underrated communication skill that we don't often talk about. Many times we tend not to think about it, and we oftentimes don't do it well. It's really important to practice active listening. So we know that studies actually show that active listening is an effective evidence-based strategy for communication. It also shows that we care and we need to take other people's concerns seriously and allow people to express their views, especially in a judgment-free zone, which I know is very difficult in these times. And obviously, while we're doing this, we need to be respectful. There's nothing worse than having someone come at you in a very condescending and patronizing manner, whether they're kind of hurling insults at you. It's just, of course, not the best way to start a conversation with people. One of the other things is, of course, finding common ground. So in a time where, again, we have lots of different views and opinions, it's really important that we're able to connect with each other. There are similarities among ourselves, otherwise we wouldn't have the relationships we do have. So, really trying to understand motivations of folks. For example, why they have the views they have or why they've made the decisions they've made. Oftentimes it comes down to sometimes the most basic of things, which is, we're all trying to protect our families, protect our loved ones, stay healthy and stay safe. We all want to get to the same destination, but perhaps in a different way. And so really trying to connect with each other, I think, is really important. Something else you mentioned, Chana, at the very beginning was perhaps in science communication, for example, it's maybe not the most effective way to sort of try to force facts down people's throats. It really, we know, is not as effective. And so storytelling is actually really important. And when I talk about storytelling, we're obviously talking about, using an anecdote or something that's happened within your life around the facts. So we're not talking about telling a fictional story, but rather, talking about something that's factual, but using an anecdote in your life. And I know that's one of the really important skill sets. And then just a couple other things, this is not... It's not a marathon. It's a marathon and not a race. It really does take a lot of time. Doing the work that we do requires lots of practice. It does not come overnight. It really requires us to take the time and invest the time if we feel the need to invest the time and if those relationships are important to us. And of course, picking your battles. Not all conversations are necessary. And honestly, if you don't have the mental capacity to engage in certain conversations where you're recognizing it really isn't going anywhere, it's fine to just leave that conversation. Albeit respectfully, but it's completely fine to leave that conversation if you don't feel like it's going where in a productive direction. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I know a lot of science communicators run into fatigue and frustration, and yeah, it's important to know when to call it, I guess.
Yeah, 100%. And so I think were there other things that you wanted to share, Chana?
Yeah, I would say that these sorts of approaches to the conversation are very much aligned with what what we say at those nerdy girls, which is we love our acronyms, by the way, at those nerdy girls. So one that for this topic was SART. So show. It's a bit of a stretch where the letters actually fit, but the model for having this conversations with a conspiracy theorist, for example, was S was for show empathy. A is for affirm critical thinking. So conspiracy theorists don't think they're, wackos. They think they're thinking critically, right? And that is valuable. You want to affirm that that's a valuable thing to do. And R is avoid ridicule, like you mentioned. That's the quick way to end the conversation. And T was for invoke trusted messengers. So I think it's actually important to recognize who someone considers to be a reputable source, and to once you start to get to the point where you're conveying information, think carefully about what sources that person might be amenable to listening to. It may not be the CDC, for example.
That is true. Yeah.
Well, I think that's probably a good segue into the actual content and the knowledge, the expertise, and the understanding of misinformation. So why don't we actually first I'm going to drop a couple of links because we're only talking about the tip of the iceberg here with all of these tips, and both of our organizations have written a lot about these, so we want to throughout this conversation leave you with a lot of resources to keep building your toolkit. So sorry, now we'll move on to one of the areas of content that is useful both personally and for sharing with others, which is misinformation red flags. Maybe I'll start with two of my favorites.
Yeah, sure. Go ahead. Yeah.
So these are things where if you encounter one of these, features of an information source, whether it's a news article, a blog, whatever information source it is, if you encounter this, it should be a red flag. It should be a warning bell and tell you that you need to definitely dig a little deeper and validate this source. So one of the number one things that is an easy flag to apply is there an actual source for whatever claim is being made? And if you'll notice, those dirty girls, ScienceUpFirst, we always put references, citations for everything that we assert. Same thing for a really good news outlet or news story. They'll cite the actual study within the news story. So if there's no citation, it's just a study said this, and you can't even find the study, or a social media post that makes an assertion without you being able to fact check it yourself, that's a huge red flag. Second red flag is a one-sided story. So if an article comes across as a persuasive sales pitch without acknowledging limitation or other perspectives, this is a red flag. And in fact, it's sort of on a related side. If you're going deeper and reading a scientific publication, it's best practice to always acknowledge the limitations, and many scientists spend as much time talking about their limitations as they do about the conclusion. So be leery of anyone who's not giving that context and bigger picture and just focusing on what they want you to hear. I'll turn it over to you to contribute a few more red flags.
Yeah, sure. So those were some really good red flags, especially those sources. Two of my favorites, red flags, two of the red flags, I often look at and that we often see, and we see especially during the current climate, is the appeal to emotion. I think, this is a really important one that we need to recognize. And I think once we start to become aware of it, then we can be more critical in how we are appraising the types of information we're consuming. So typically, with pieces of misinformation, or rather even disinformation, so where folks are willingly wanting you to get upset, they are trying to evoke some really strong emotions, because they know, that can impair your ability to really process the information, to really think critically. So using strong emotional language can really, get you to be, fired up and wanting to start spreading that information, but perhaps without actually pausing to really think about the information you're consuming before you even spread it. So it's always really important to, just be aware, are you being emotionally, provoked, and take a step back. Another one, and this one is a big one, is going against the scientific consensus. And when I talk about the scientific consensus, I'm really referring to that, the collective agreement among scientists with a particular topic. And when I say this is not light. When it comes to scientific consensus, how that comes about is essentially, it's based on extensive research, lots of evidence, lots of peer review. It's a process that requires lots of information and evidence that actually has to prove a piece of information. And this piece of information has actually come about by separate scientists, individually, independently. But then it so happens that, if there are many of these scientists that actually come to these conclusions, then more likely than not, that is the actual answer that's currently being accepted and understood within the scientific community. Now, having said that, we know the consensus doesn't mean that every single scientist agrees. What it means is that most of the scientists agree that this is what the information is. And so this is what I think it's really important when it comes to science literacy. And I know that you'll be chatting about that next, where it's important to understand the process of science, how science works, and why it is that we talk about the scientific consensus.
Yeah, this consensus is something that you can't emphasize enough. I think it's hard if you haven't been in science to understand that one study is a single study is really not enough to make a claim in the vast majority of cases. You need to have a body of evidence. And if something is going contrary to a body of evidence, that's where we get into big trouble. So those are some red flags to look out for, both, again, in yourself, and then if you spread awareness about these red flags, then maybe others will be kind of a little more skeptical. Because I think this is something that's a whole other conversation, but it's harder to change someone's mind once they've made their mind, right? So I think the best defense is to be proactive about what you absorb in the first place. We get wedded to our ideas pretty darn quickly. So let's move on and talk a little bit about science literacy. Again, once you have, this is like a foundation that you can think of as, protection against misinformation. And you want to support this in yourself, and you want to support this in others. And I think one of the most important pieces here is just understanding that science is a process, because if we view science as a set of facts, then that fosters distrust in science when we learn more information and the conclusions change. And trust in science is just such a big issue right now. So I'll turn that over to you and see what else you wanted to contribute to this discussion about science literacy and what that is, and what science really is.
Yeah, I mean, like you mentioned, trust is a huge issue right now. And I think one of the main things that we even saw why there was, not a little bit, but there was, a decrease in trust during the pandemic, for example, was because folks felt as though, the information that was coming to them was changing, especially if information was coming to them through, regulated bodies or government bodies. They seem to be different every single day. And I think, again, that's why science literacy is really important. And it's because, it's important for us to all understand that science is a process. It's constantly evolving. And as we get different pieces of information or data, those pieces of data are fitting together like a puzzle. So we are, firstly, we're unveiling and revealing what that piece of that mystery is that we're looking to understand. And that's why, as it evolves, information evolves, policies evolve, and decisions that we make evolve as well. And it's really important for that. I think also with regards to trust and science literacy in the public, it's important to trust those who are transparent. So obviously we will have more trust with folks who are transparent, who show accountability. And so if mistakes are made, they come forward and they let us know what went wrong, why it went wrong, what we know versus what we don't know. I think something else that's really important when it comes to science literacy, again, as much as science is a process, there are also lots of uncertainties within the scientific process and with science and the data that we know. And it's that feeling of being able to be comfortable with the unknown, and being comfortable while you feel uncomfortable with the uncertainties around us. So all of this, I think, plays into really understanding, how science works, the process of it, how it evolves, and again, going back to the scientific consensus, how we all come to agree on certain information independently.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And like I said earlier, I think it's tricky to convey how much should I trust, a given scientific, how much should I trust science? How much should I trust a result? I mean, those are two different things. Again, science is the process of like refining our knowledge and testing hypotheses and refining our beliefs based on that. And what good science, I think a hallmark of good science is recognition of the level of confidence in any given result. And so when you have a consensus statement, let's say the World Health Organization does an evaluation of carcinogens. They won't just say yes or no. They'll always rank them as, high level of evidence, moderate level of evidence, low level of evidence, and not enough evidence to make a conclusion. And when you see those levels of confidence, that's when you start to, that's what we really need. And I don't think that there's enough communication in the public with that. Any given assertion from science comes with a level of confidence. And the things that are the highest confidence are not going to change that much over time. But things that are lower confidence are probably going to change.
That is just an excellent point. I think we can't drive that home enough, because I think it even goes back to how folks are able to, for example, spot a red flag or misinformation. Usually, folks who are uncertain of what they're talking about, or if there's misinformation floating around, we're saying, oh, this is 100% No, it just does not work like that. So like you were mentioning, there are levels of this confidence, and that goes to show us, that's where we are able to trust the information that's coming in, because absolutely nothing is certain. And if you are seeing any sort of information online where, again, it's appealing to emotion and it's talking about 100% certainty, that's absolutely incorrect.
Yeah, scientists are famous for saying, probably and likely and all that. And unfortunately, that's the reality.
Yeah.
So just keeping mindful of time, I did want to briefly mention one other general, aspect of navigating information and spotting misinformation, or protecting yourself, and that is misinformer tactics. So people who are perpetuating misinformation basically follow a playbook. There's actually recipes for how to try to deceive people. Some of that plays on, cognitive biases and the way we think. Some of that plays on logical fallacies and the way we reason. We don't have time to discuss that in great detail, but I want to just to raise awareness of that and say that both Science Up First and Those Nerdy Girls do have some resources on that. Did you want to add anything briefly before we move on to some practical tips?
No, I mean, I think that's great. I think it's really important that folks become aware of what these tactics are, so that when they are reading information, they can pick it up for themselves and realize, oh, wait a minute, this person or this article, they're using these tactics, and I really need to take a pause and research this information more and go to trusted sources. Yeah.
So let's move on to some practical tips, and you and I can each share some of our own strategies, and then things that we use ourselves and that we find are quick, easy things to apply in your own thinking as you navigate the sea of information we're all surrounded by. So you want to go ahead?
Yeah, sure. I think before I even share them, I just really quickly want to say, first of all, we're all vulnerable to misinformation. So don't ever feel, any kind of way if you have believed a piece of misinformation before. I'm very sure that we've all at some point believed a piece of misinformation. As much as we both do this work, it takes practice, and we are just aware of the tools. We have the tools, and so we're here to share them with you. So a couple of tips that I'd like to leave folks with is, number one, like we mentioned, this may be simple, but it's very effective. Pausing. So you read something that's emotionally charging, you're reading something that you're unsure of, please just pause. Literally take a second, take a step back, really think about, okay, for example, who's writing this? Do they have the expertise? Is the date correct? All of those types of things. But taking that time to pause to really assess the piece of information you're consuming is really important, because it will avoid you from spreading it and also believing it, especially if it's inaccurate. I want to say something that I used to do a lot myself, and I've caught myself, and I think I'm much better at it now, is reading beyond the headlines. We all get caught by headlines, especially flashy headlines, again, appealing to emotion. And we'll see a headline and we'll just go share it without really reading the body of information. Please don't do that. Let's all start, reading the body of information beyond those headlines, because oftentimes what's in the headline is not actually what's reflected in the body of information. So, I think it's really important that we do that. So Chana, I'll let you finish up with your pick.
Sure. Yeah, I think that my top tip is to be skeptical and be humble. Like you said, we're to recognize that all of us are susceptible to this. And a second tip is to be aware of confirmation bias. The fact that you're more likely to believe something, to sort of accept a new piece of information as true if it confirms something you already believe. And so, for example, you might share, if you think the ketogenic diet is the best diet or whatever, you might share an article that's pro ketogenic diet that came in, and without even really reading it. Oh yeah, it's probably true. But if you see some article debunking the ketogenic diet, you're probably going to say, oh, that's wrong, and be much more critical and find a reason why it's wrong, right? So try to be just as skeptical of things that confirm your beliefs as things that don't. So I definitely have to catch myself doing that. And one other tip is, my brother gave me this tip because he works in the misinformation field as well, which is to just try Googling, fact check X, whatever the term is, or fact or debunk X. So to actually go out of your way to look to invalidate the thing that you're curious about. Because if you just search for the positive, like, is it true that blah, you might find a lot of articles agreeing that. But if you find, if you're searching debunking that, then you'll find the debunking and the other side of the other point of view. Since we are just about out of time, I think we should probably start wrapping up, dumping some resources and recommendations, since again, this is a massive field, and there's so many different ways that each of us can pitch in to fight misinformation, and to equip ourselves to be, to navigate information better. So what are some of your recommendations?
Yeah, so of course I have to give a shout out to our website, ScienceUpFirst.com. As was mentioned, we've got lots and lots and lots of information on there. We've recently redone our website, and I'm really proud to say we have lots of great resources, so please check that out. We've also got our campaign. So it's you can find out more information about the campaign on our website, ScienceUpFirst.com. And the campaign is called Together Against Misinformation. So it's a national campaign, Canada-wide, but of course, we're also doing hybrid events online as well. So please feel free to join us regardless of wherever you are in the world. We will have a few events happening next week, specifically next Tuesday, November 12th at 6 p.m. Mountain Time.
All right. And yeah, I wanted to give a shout out to those nerdy girls, of course. We have a number of posts. Some of our posts are answering questions about COVID or a specific question, but some of them are more general on data literacy and information literacy, logical fallacies, cognitive biases. So I'm putting a link to, some way that you can index specifically for those searches. And I want to give a shout out to our leader, Sarah Gorman, who is an expert in misinformation. And she has 2 great books on this topic, Anatomy of Deception and Denying to the Grave. So I recommend checking out her books, and I've learned a ton from her. So that's one more resource. Let's see. We are pretty much out of time. So I guess we should wrap up with where to find more from, each other's organizations, since I assume there's some Science Up First people new to those nerdy girls and vice versa. So for those nerdy girls, there's our website, thosenerdy-girls.org, and we also have a newsletter on Substack. And we do have an option there for how to be a paid subscriber, which gives you some perks, including a priority question box. And our archives on our website, they do have over 2,000 posts and Q&As. So there is a treasure trove of resources there. And then for myself, I have my own page as well at Fueled by Science and my own Substack. You can just look for my name, Dr. Chana Davis. Over to you.
Yeah, sure. So again, ScienceUpFirst.com, but more importantly, Science Up First is actually found on all major social media platforms. So you can find us here on Facebook, on Instagram, on X, and on YouTube as well. And just personally for myself, I'm on Instagram at Beyond the Ivory Tower, and also here on Facebook at Dr. Krishana Sankar.
Well, thank you so much for the work that you do, both personally on your page, and thank you to Science Up First. I mean, our organizations are clearly very much kindred spirits.
And thank you too. Thank you to those nerdy girls and to you too.
Yeah, it takes a village, right? And thank you to everyone who tuned in today, because you wouldn't be here if you didn't care about fighting misinformation. And so we hope you learned something today, and I hope that you're fortified to go out there and fight the good fight. And don't give up. I got to say, those nerdy girls put out a, we're here for you post today or yesterday. And we got so much gratitude for the fact that, those of us standing up for science, fighting misinformation, we're not giving up. And, we don't want you to give up either.
Yeah, and thank you for your work. Again, we've got a lot of posts too on our end with, the difficult conversations, especially during this time. And also, please take care of yourselves. We are all here doing the good work, but we also need to take care of ourselves and just, take stock of when we've had enough and we need to take a rest, and that's fine too.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks again. Well, take care, everyone. See you again next time.